do you think modern societies are too structured around control and hierarchy? And if so, how can we start unlearning that? How can we start moving towards something that's more in line with something more organic or intuitive?
Yeah. Well, the simple answer to the question is yes. I do think they're too structured around control and authority. But then there's a history of that. So my academic background is the history of medicine, the history of science. When I went to the Amazon, I went there to learn about ayahuasca. I'd been involved in an ayahuasca group for about 7 years by that point, 6 years. And I wanted to learn about the roots. And when I got there, I got terribly ill. I got leishmaniasis, which is a bacteria. It's a protist actually. It's a protozoal colony that eats your flesh, and in the second stage of infection, it can start to dissolve the cartilage in your nose and throat and ears, and you can become quite a mess. Um, and I'd gone there for a reason. I'd gone there to understand ayahuasca, and I'd gone there to investigate their local medical traditions. And I'd done, a bunch of years, not just my degree, but then had written most of that first book, Science Revealed, which is a lot about this, uh, about how medicine works, about how pharmaceuticals industry works, and about natural medicine and the intelligence of it. And I got given an opportunity to really test that out in my own body. And in the course of working with ayahuasca, for a period of 5 months of it, I was drinking ayahuasca every day to treat this illness. Um, I let's say I gave up or I stopped giving allegiance to the arrogance of colonial medicine, which reckons it can control everything. Even though it can't even control its own children in its boring schools, because we've got an epidemic of what people call ADHD, which is, I think, much more deeper and much more interesting than attention deficit. I've been diagnosed with attention deficit. Nothing wrong with my attention if I'm focusing on something interesting,
Hmm.
right? If it's boring, I'm not interested.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so that's not an attention deficit. Um, so I think the world is, I'm not suggesting you go to the Amazon and get ill.
And
But
by the way, if you haven't tried ayahuasca, taking it daily for 5 months is yeah, it's takes some willpower, doesn't it?
make sure you know make sure you're doing that with supervision. Like, let's be careful with powerful tools here. Um, and if you're not sure, then don't. But yeah, so I did quite an extreme thing there. It didn't feel very extreme for me, but because actually writing the book in the first place was pretty extreme. I dedicated a whole bunch of my life to it, and I was already on a kind of narrative where what was I going to do? I was going to take antimonium tartrate injections 3 times a day for 150 injections of heavy metal into my blood. I didn't want to, right? So I thought that was a pretty extreme thing to do. But I'd come from a background of investigating medicine quite deeply. But I think in our lives, more and more, we're being presented with choices, right? Are we going to do the thing which we are expected to do and we're told to do by people who, if we really look closely at them, they don't actually have that moral authority anymore anyway, right? Are you going to do what your state tells you to do? I mean, have you looked at what your state is doing recently? So I think it can be quite small, like every choice we're given, there's an opportunity to key into what we really want to do, or there's the opportunity to respond to a trigger which is saying you probably should do this, right? And by building up your confidence in your intuition, right? It can be as simple as leave now, go left. When we start to engage with that, all kinds of interesting things happen.
Great.
And I will say one more thing, actually. When Hitler decided to invade Russia, um, he was going to fail anyway, right? He didn't pack enough uniforms. He thought he could conquer Russia the same way he conquered Belgium, with a whole load of meth and a whole load of aggression. And it was a different prospect, right? you don't need to resist the tanks coming at you, metaphorically. They are going to run out of fuel. Certainly, you don't need to resist with all of your power. So in many ways, kind of retreating and waiting for the engines of domination and control to snarl themselves up is a bit of a better tactic, I think, than firing pea shooters at panthers.
That's such an interesting analogy. So you're kind of comparing activism against an perceived state oppression versus just retreating and creating your own space and finding your own ways to live your life, and letting that expend its energy and aggression that kind of runs out of support and energy at some point.
Yeah, I think it needs to be, each case needs to be considered, because there are times when it is reasonable to resist. It is a good idea to resist,
Sure.
But Bayo Kumalafe is really good on this. What if the response to the problem is part of the problem? What if turning up with a united front against some front of oppression is actually buying into that narrative, wasting your energy in that narrative, where you could be building alternative systems and alternative ways of connecting?
Exactly. And so often the revolutionary forces end up being the new oppressors, right? We've seen that in history.